It started on a quiet street in Cheshire. Well-kept homes, polished cars, not a single thing out of place. The kind of neighborhood where everyone minds their business, and no one asks questions. But behind one of those doors, a man was running the most sophisticated drug smuggling operation the United Kingdom has ever seen. He moved more drugs through this country than any cartel we've ever come across, and for years, he remained completely invisible. Paul Green lived a life that didn't raise suspicion. A successful logistics operator. A family man. A familiar face at the school gates. But what the neighbors didn't know was that Green had transformed Britain's everyday kitchen staples, garlic, onions, and ginger, into the perfect cover for moving billions of pounds worth of narcotics. Green wasn't just a smuggler. He was the architect of an empire, coordinating multiple crime groups, using real businesses to hide illegal cargo, and staying under the radar for years. How did a quiet man from the suburbs, with no criminal record, build a £7 billion drug empire in plain sight? And how did it all come crashing down? Paul Green. A man with no criminal record, no history of violence, and no reason for anyone, not the police, not his neighbors, not even his family, to suspect a thing. He looked like any other middle-aged businessman. Quiet. Respectable. Unremarkable. But between 2016 and 2021, as Britain faced rising drug demand and post-Brexit border disruption, Paul Green built one of the most complex trafficking operations the country has ever seen. Authorities estimate he smuggled over £7 billion worth of drugs into the UK. He did it without making a sound, using a network of fake companies, forged shipping documents, and hijacked trade routes that stretched across Liverpool, Felixstowe, and Southampton. The cover. Garlic and ginger. Routine shipments. Unremarkable cargo. Perfect camouflage. But Paul Green wasn't working alone. He led an 18-member syndicate, a tight circle of seasoned smugglers, corrupt freight handlers, and logistics brokers, all hand-picked and operating under strict compartmentalization. Each played a role. Most didn't know the full picture. That was by design. At the heart of his operation was Stephen Martin, Green's right-hand man. A 53-year-old from Bolton's Chorley Old Road, Martin was the architect of the financial web that kept the empire afloat. Offshore accounts. Clean invoices. Shell firms across Malta, Cyprus, and beyond. While Green stayed behind the curtain, Martin made the numbers work. Together, they orchestrated the import of over 300 tons of drugs, disguised as food-grade freight, moving them through Britain's busiest ports, and vanishing them into the country's underworld supply chain. The logistics were staggering. The deception was brilliant. Every container passed through customs with seemingly legitimate paperwork, often aided by forged shipping documents, false freight declarations, and, in some cases, complicit import agents who looked the other way. From Manchester to Bolton and London to Leeds, their reach was silent but absolute. And while his containers moved freely across borders, his family lived comfortably in the countryside, claiming to know nothing. But investigators weren't convinced. This is the story of how the UK's most unlikely drug kingpin built a criminal empire, without ever stepping into the light. Before we dive deeper into the case, take a second to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a true crime story from the UK's hidden underworld. Paul Green was from Cheshire. From a young age, he worked in transport and logistics, moving goods, learning routes, and understanding the rhythms of supply chains. It was honest work, and he did it well. To friends and neighbors, Paul was quiet. Polite. Family-oriented. There was nothing flashy about him. No outbursts. No edge. Just a man who kept to himself, worked hard, and always came home. Over time, he built a career, small freight companies, import-export licenses, and the kind of contacts that came with years of trust. To anyone watching, it was the profile of a man who understood the business of moving things, legally. He married young, had 2 daughters, and later became a grandfather. Family photos show holidays in Spain, Sunday lunches, birthday parties, the kind of life that didn't raise questions. They lived in a quiet home in Solihull. Comfortable, but not excessive. Safe. There were no red flags. No arrests. No signs of violence. Just a clean record and a reputation for doing things by the book. Professionally, Green presented himself as a freight broker and food importer. He dealt in bulk shipments, spices, produce, dry goods, and he knew how to keep things moving. Suppliers trusted him. So did customs officers. He was efficient, well-spoken, and always had the right paperwork. As the business grew, so did the image. Luxury cars. A second property. Designer watches. But nothing outrageous, just enough success to match the narrative. And then, the system shifted. In the years after Brexit, UK ports were overwhelmed. Inspections slowed. Protocols changed. Backlogs grew. Containers that once took hours to process were now sitting for days, often unchecked, often waved through. At the same time, drug demand in the UK surged. Cocaine. Heroin. Cannabis. Prices rose. Supply chains strained. Organized crime adapted quickly, and so did Paul Green. He saw an opening. With years of experience, trusted trade routes, and a spotless reputation, Green began to expand. Quietly. Carefully. Systematically. And almost no one noticed. At the height of his operation, Paul Green was moving tons of Class A and B drugs across Europe. Quietly hidden inside refrigerated lorries and standard shipping containers. From the outside, they were routine deliveries. Garlic, onions, and ginger. Shipments entered the UK through Felixstowe, Southampton, and Dover, ports overwhelmed by post-Brexit pressure, where delays were common and inspections were rushed or skipped entirely. Each load came with legitimate paperwork. Bills of lading, customs declarations, and EU-wide invoices, all tied to a web of front companies registered in the UK, the Netherlands, and Spain. The documents held up. The addresses existed. The goods were real, at least on the surface. But behind those crates of produce were false compartments, custom-built to conceal bricks of cocaine, heroin, and cannabis. Some containers had false bottoms, others had sidewall cavities lined with insulation to mask heat signatures. The logistics were surgical. Drivers were briefed only on what they needed to know. Some received drop-off instructions via burner phones. Others made mid-route vehicle handovers, switching lorries in secluded laybys or industrial estates, leaving no paper trail, no digital trace. Deliveries were routed through remote-controlled warehouses. Sites with automated gates and motion-triggered lights, allowing for loading and unloading without anyone ever being seen. In 2019, authorities intercepted a container flagged for a random inspection at Felixstowe. It was listed as a shipment of mixed vegetables, headed to a small food wholesaler in Birmingham. Inside, hidden beneath sacks of ginger and garlic, they found over £20 million worth of drugs, compressed into industrial vacuum packs, double-wrapped, and heat-sealed. The bust led to the arrest of 3 couriers. All low-level. All replaceable. During questioning, one claimed to believe he was transporting food only. Another refused to speak at all, even after facing a 15-year sentence. Despite the scale of the seizure, Paul Green's name never came up. His signature was never on a manifest. His voice was never on a call. To investigators, it was a dead end. But behind the scenes, Green's operation kept running, smarter, tighter, and quieter. And the drugs kept flowing in. In early 2020, everything changed. The National Crime Agency launched Operation Venetic, a covert mission that would expose the hidden world of Europe's most protected criminals. For years, traffickers, hitmen, and smugglers had relied on EncroChat, a supposedly unbreakable encrypted messaging service. What they didn't know was that investigators had finally broken in. Inside those servers were millions of messages, coded, careful, but damning. Among them were repeated mentions of garlic, onions, and boxes. Phrases that, on the surface, looked harmless. But when placed alongside port schedules, shipping manifests, and payment trails, they told a very different story. And one name, or rather, one alias, appeared again and again. The big fella. The messages were cautious. No names, no specifics. But the coordination was clear. Drop-offs, arrivals, weights, prices, all hidden in the language of vegetables. As investigators mapped the flow, a picture began to form. 4 separate organized crime groups, all operating independently, but all tied to one logistics hub. One man. One name behind the curtain. Paul Green. The paper trail, once clean, began to fracture. Company records overlapped. Freight brokers used identical forms. Shipping routes repeated across networks. And at the center, Green's businesses. Surveillance teams were deployed. Green was followed, never far, never close. He met known traffickers in hotel car parks, always in daylight, never with phones. Conversations were short, gestures minimal. No handshakes. No documents. Still, there was no direct proof. Green didn't text. He didn't call. And no one, not one suspect, was willing to speak his name. Then, a breakthrough. A batch of EncroChat messages was decrypted, fully. Times, locations, and instructions. It was enough to set up a controlled delivery. A container flagged for garlic arrived at a warehouse on the outskirts of Manchester. Police waited. Hours passed. Then, without warning, the warehouse lights flickered on, remotely. The doors opened. Inside, pallets of ginger, and hidden within, kilos of cocaine. It was enough to move. Simultaneously, a warrant was executed at Green's Solihull home. From the outside, it was quiet. Orderly. The lawn is freshly cut. But hidden in the walls, beneath false panels and behind fitted cupboards, officers found over £1 million in cash, neatly bundled, shrink-wrapped, and labeled by date. Still, Green said nothing. There were no direct messages linking him to the drug terms. No fingerprints on the contraband. No witnesses willing to testify. Some were too scared. Others were loyal. A few simply disappeared. Investigators were closing in. But the man at the center of it all was still one step ahead. By early 2024, the illusion had shattered. Paul Green, the man no one suspected, the man who built a criminal empire behind garlic and ginger, now stood before a jury at Birmingham Crown Court. The courtroom was packed. Journalists lined the back rows. Green sat silent, suited, unmoved. The charges were extensive. Multiple counts of conspiracy to import Class A and B drugs. Money laundering. Fraud. Organized crime involvement. But the heart of the case came down to one question. Was Paul Green the architect, or just a name on the paperwork? The prosecution didn't hesitate. They called him the logistical mastermind, the man who kept the engine running, hidden behind layers of front companies and forged identities. They showed EncroChat logs, coded conversations referencing Green's family, his bank accounts, even the birthdays of his grandchildren, all used as time markers in drug deliveries. They presented over 20,000 pages of digital evidence, mapping transactions, container shipments, and intercepted messages over a 6-year period. They revealed financial records, transfers totaling millions to offshore accounts, none of which Green had declared. Shell companies that led nowhere. Cash movements that began and ended in silence. And then came the footage. Grainy but damning, surveillance of Green at multiple ports, meeting drivers, handing off envelopes, always brief, always without words. One clip showed Green overseeing the unloading of a container, the same one where customs later found 200 kilograms of compressed cannabis wrapped in ginger sacks. Prosecutors argued these weren't casual visits. They were handovers. Instructions. Payments. They called Green the head of a sophisticated and vast criminal operation. The defense pushed back. Green's lawyers argued he was a legitimate freight operator. That he dealt with subcontractors and couldn't be expected to know what was hidden in every crate. They blamed the rogue drivers. They blamed the traffickers. They reminded the jury, Green never appeared in a single drug deal. He never typed the messages himself. And no witness, to this day, has claimed to receive an order directly from him. As for Stephen Martin, Green's financial lieutenant, his defense was similar. Martin claimed he was merely managing the company's finances on paper, and had no involvement in the shipment logistics. He blamed falsified invoices and third-party processors for the discrepancies. But it wasn't enough. After 7 weeks of evidence, cross-examinations, and encrypted revelations, the jury delivered its verdict. Guilty. On all major counts. Paul Green was sentenced to 32 years in prison. He didn't flinch. Martin received a 28-year sentence. The remaining 16 syndicate members were sentenced to terms ranging from 6 to 22 years. The judge called it an operation without precedent, vast in scale, surgical in execution, and devastating in its reach. The public was stunned. A quiet, well-dressed businessman had run one of the largest drug smuggling networks in UK history, not from the shadows, but from behind a desk. The case also sparked debate in Parliament. Lawmakers raised concerns about port security and freight oversight, especially regarding routine clearances at major UK entry points. There were immediate calls to increase funding for the National Crime Agency, and border force procedures were reviewed. New inspections were ordered for agricultural imports. Garlic and ginger were no longer ignored. But the story didn't end there. In the weeks that followed, authorities launched new investigations into Green's associates, his shipping agents, and linked companies across Europe. Assets were seized. Warehouses in Manchester and Essex were raided. Transport vehicles and forklifts were sold at auction. Several customs officers were quietly suspended. A handful of port managers were moved off-site. And though the operation had been dismantled, investigators warned it was far from over. Green's family made no public statement. Some relatives allegedly moved abroad following the trial. Yet questions remain. Who else knew? How deep did the network go? And if Green was the big fella, was there someone even bigger behind him? Even now, years later, officers say they're still uncovering pieces of his network. Some believe it wasn't just garlic and ginger. That other routes, other fronts, are still out there, waiting to be exposed. As for Paul Green, he never gave a statement. Never named an accomplice. And he never explained how he built it all, or who helped him keep it hidden. A suburban businessman. A quiet life. And a £7 billion drug empire hidden in plain sight. For 5 years, Paul Green manipulated the UK's food supply chain. Using garlic, ginger, and onions as camouflage for one of the most sophisticated trafficking operations in British history. He coordinated multiple crime networks. He moved millions without a single alarm bell. And for the longest time, no one saw him coming. It took an encrypted messaging leak, years of surveillance, and forensic logistics tracking to finally bring it all down. The result? The UK's largest ever drug bust. A 32-year prison sentence. And a legacy that still haunts the ports he once used. But the question remains. How many more big fellas are still out there? Hiding behind trusted businesses. Moving weight behind everyday deliveries. Operating under names no one thinks to check. Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you want more gripping true crime stories from the UK's underworld, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Because the next story might be even closer to home.